I still remember the exact shade of beige on the walls of that conference room. It was my third year at Meridian Technologies, a mid-sized software company in Boston that had been my home since graduating with my computer science degree. The quarterly performance review was supposed to be routine. I'd consistently exceeded my targets as a senior developer and had recently led a successful database migration project that saved the company thousands in potential downtime. "Charlotte, you're exceptionally bright," my manager Ryan began, shuffling papers in front of him. "Your technical skills are unquestionable." I nodded, waiting for the but that inevitably follows such openings. "But I'm concerned that you're too technical in your communications. The executives struggle to follow your presentations. Jenkins from sales mentioned he zones out when you explain product features." I felt my face flush. "I've been simplifying my language in meetings. I created those visual aids for the last presentation specifically to—" "That's just it," Ryan interrupted. "You think you're simplifying, but you're still speaking another language to non-technical staff. It's holding you back from advancement opportunities." The conversation continued with suggestions about communication courses and shadowing the marketing team. I nodded politely, but inside I was seething. Too technical? I was a senior developer at a technology company. Being technical was literally my job. "We're passing you over for the lead architect position," Ryan concluded. "We're giving it to Matt. He's got a way of making complex concepts accessible." Matt, 6 months my junior, with half my project experience. The same Matt who had asked me to explain containerization to him just last week. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Not really. Walking back to my desk, I passed the glass-walled conference room where executives gathered for their weekly meeting. I paused, watching their animated discussion over pie charts and growth projections. Did they ever get told they were too financial or too strategic? That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Charles River. The city lights reflected on the water as I contemplated my options. I could take the communication courses, learn to dumb down my expertise, and hope for the next promotion opportunity, or I could find a place that valued my technical knowledge rather than considering it a liability. But there was a third option forming in my mind as I remembered something my graduate advisor once told me. Sometimes the problem isn't that you're too much of something. It's that you're in an environment that doesn't recognize the value of that something. I opened my laptop and began researching. If being technical was my strength, perhaps I needed to learn how to make it my superpower, not by hiding it, but by transforming how I wielded it. The next morning, I walked into Meridian with a plan. I wouldn't be leaving. Not yet anyway. I had something to prove first, not just to Ryan or to Matt, but to myself. "Morning, Charlotte," called Eliza from the adjacent cubicle. "How'd your review go?" I smiled. It was illuminating. "Hey, are you still working on that presentation for the healthcare client?" "Yeah, and struggling. Their CTO keeps asking technical questions I can't answer." "Want some help?" I offered. I could join the call. Little did I know, that simple offer would be the first step on a journey that would completely transform my career trajectory. Over the next few weeks, I started volunteering for client-facing meetings, something I'd previously avoided. Eliza's healthcare client presentation went surprisingly well. Their CTO had peppered me with questions about security protocols and data integration, which I answered with confidence. What surprised me most was how the non-technical executives leaned forward with interest when I explained concepts using analogies related to their industry. "It's like having separate, secure vaults for different patient information," I'd said, explaining data partitioning. Even if someone gained access to one vault, the others remain protected. After the meeting, Eliza pulled me aside. "That was incredible, Charlotte. They actually understood what our system does. We've been trying to land this client for months." The contract was signed the following week. I began developing a new approach to technical communication. Instead of trying to simplify my knowledge, which often resulted in explanations that were either too vague or still too complex, I started building bridges between technical concepts and my audience's existing knowledge. For the marketing team, I explained load balancing in terms of customer traffic management. For finance, I described redundancy systems as insurance policies with different coverage levels. I wasn't dumbing down the content. I was translating it into languages they already spoke. 3 months after my review, I found myself invited to an unexpected meeting with Sandra Hughes, our Chief Operating Officer. My pulse quickened as I walked into her corner office with its panoramic view of the Boston skyline. "Charlotte, take a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I've been hearing your name quite a bit lately." I braced myself, unsure if this was positive or negative attention. "The healthcare client specifically mentioned your name in their feedback. Then Westbrook Financial requested you personally for their system integration discussions." She leaned forward. "What changed?" I considered my answer carefully. I realized that being technical isn't about how much I know, but how effectively I can bridge knowledge gaps. I've been focusing on translation rather than simplification. Sandra studied me for a moment. "We're assembling a new team, technical advisors who can work directly with our enterprise clients and internal departments. We need people who understand our systems deeply, but can communicate that understanding effectively. I'd like you to be our first technical advisor, reporting directly to me." The offer came with a substantial raise and a role that didn't exist on the company's organizational chart. It wasn't the lead architect position. It was something potentially more influential. That evening, I ran into Ryan in the parking garage. His expression was difficult to read as he congratulated me on the new position. "This is quite an opportunity," he said. "Sandra doesn't create roles without serious consideration." "Thank you," I replied, feeling oddly grateful for the review that had sparked this transformation. "I took your feedback to heart, just not in the way either of us expected." As I drove home, I realized this was just the beginning. I had discovered a rare skill at the intersection of technical expertise and communication, a space where few people were comfortable operating. Now I needed to define what this new role could become. My first 6 months as technical advisor were exhilarating and exhausting. I found myself straddling multiple worlds, working with development teams to understand our technology at its deepest level, sitting with sales to grasp client needs, and collaborating with executives to align technical solutions with business strategy. I created a documentation system that layered technical information, executive summaries that provided high-level understanding, department-specific guides that addressed particular concerns, and detailed technical specifications for the development teams. Each layer spoke the language of its intended audience while maintaining consistent meaning across all levels. Word spread about Meridian's approach. Clients appreciated having someone who could both understand their business challenges and translate them into technical requirements, and vice versa. Our close rate on enterprise deals increased by 38%. When Sandra invited me to present at the quarterly board meeting, I knew it was a pivotal moment. The boardroom was intimidating. 15 people in tailored suits seated around a massive mahogany table, most with decades more experience than me. Ms. Davis will explain the technical strategy behind our recent client acquisition successes, Sandra introduced me. Taking a deep breath, I began not with technical specifications or architecture diagrams, but with stories. When Central Hospital came to us, they weren't looking for a database solution, I explained. They were looking for a way to reduce patient wait times while improving care quality. Our technology was just a means to that end. I walked them through how we matched technical capabilities to specific business outcomes for several key clients, illustrating complex concepts with relevant analogies and real-world impact. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before the questions began. Thoughtful, engaged questions that showed genuine understanding. The board chair, Eleanor Winters, a formidable woman with 3 decades of industry experience, spoke last. "In 30 years of technology investment, I've rarely heard someone translate complex systems into strategic value so effectively. This approach should be expanded." 2 weeks later, Sandra called me into her office again. "The board was impressed," she said, sliding a document across her desk. "They've approved the formation of a technical advisory department with you as director. You'll build a team of advisors who can replicate your approach across all our enterprise clients and internal departments." I stared at the job description, barely processing the substantial title and compensation changes. "This is unexpected, is it?" Sandra smiled. You've created measurable value by bridging worlds that rarely communicate effectively. That's worth investing in. As I built my team over the next year, I looked for people with both technical depth and communication flexibility. Engineers who wrote poetry, developers who taught coding to children, systems architects who could explain their work to their grandparents. Technical skills could be taught, but the ability to move between different worlds of understanding was rarer. We established technical advisory as a lateral department that worked across traditional silos. My team members became the translators and navigators, helping different parts of the company understand each other. Ryan stopped by my new office one afternoon. "I've been watching what you've built," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's impressive and not at all what I envisioned when I gave you that feedback." "What did you envision?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Honestly, some communication training, maybe less technical jargon. I didn't expect you to create an entirely new function within the company." I smiled. Sometimes limitations can be opportunities in disguise. As I looked out my office window at the Boston skyline, I realized how dramatically my perspective had changed since that beige conference room 3 years ago. What had felt like criticism had become the catalyst for discovering my unique value proposition. Not despite being technical, but because of how I could make technical knowledge accessible and actionable. The email arrived on a crisp autumn morning in my 4th year at Meridian. "Please join the executive committee meeting. Tuesday, 9 a.m., boardroom." It was from Eleanor Winters herself, now our CEO after a leadership transition 6 months prior. My department had grown to 15 technical advisors, working with all major clients and internal teams. We'd developed methodologies for technical translation that had become part of Meridian's competitive advantage, mentioned specifically in analyst reports about the company. Still, an invitation to the executive committee was unexpected. These weekly meetings were restricted to C-suite executives who made the highest-level decisions about company strategy and direction. When I arrived, Eleanor gestured to an empty chair beside her. "Charlotte, welcome. We've been discussing the Harrington proposal." Harrington Industries was potentially our largest client ever, a multinational manufacturing company looking to digitize their entire operation. The contract would be transformative for Meridian if we secured it. "We're stuck on their security concerns," said James, our CTO. "Their CISO is hesitant about our cloud architecture." "What specifically concerns them?" I asked. "That's just it. We can't get a clear picture. Their technical team speaks in regulatory frameworks we're unfamiliar with, and our team responds with technical specifications that don't address their actual concerns. We're talking past each other." I nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern of misaligned communication. "I've studied their industry regulations. With your permission, I could join the next discussion and help bridge that gap." Eleanor and James exchanged glances. "The next discussion is Thursday in Chicago with their executive team," Eleanor said. "Can you be ready by then?" The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. I immersed myself in Harrington's industry regulations, previous communications, and our technical documentation. I assembled a small team of my best advisors, and we worked late into the night restructuring our presentation approach. Instead of leading with our technical solutions, we'd start by demonstrating our understanding of their regulatory landscape and business challenges. "This is revolutionary," remarked Diane from my team as we finalized our slides at 1 a.m. "We're essentially speaking their language first, then inviting them into ours." "Exactly," I replied, the office lights of Boston twinkling below our conference room. "We're building a bridge from their shore, not expecting them to swim to ours." 3 days later, I found myself in a sleek conference room on the 47th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, facing Harrington's executive team. I felt a momentary flutter of nerves as 12 executives in crisp suits took their seats across the massive table. The stakes couldn't be higher. This contract would increase our company valuation by an estimated 15%. "Ms. Davis," began their CEO, Thomas Harrington III, "we've heard promising things about your approach. But I'll be frank. We've sat through a dozen tech presentations this quarter, and they all sound the same. Lots of jargon, lots of promises, very little understanding of our actual needs." I smiled, recognizing the perfect opening. Then I won't give you a tech presentation, Mr. Harrington. Instead, let me start with what keeps you up at night. Our presentation had been completely restructured, focusing first on how our security approach aligned with their regulatory requirements, then building to the technical implementation details. I used analogies specific to their manufacturing processes, comparing data pipelines to their assembly lines, security protocols to their quality control processes. When their CSO raised concerns about data sovereignty, I responded with specific references to how our architecture addressed the regulations he'd mentioned earlier. Section 47.3 of the regulatory framework requires data localization for customer information, I noted. Our regional cloud architecture keeps that data precisely where it needs to be while still enabling global operations. When their COO worried about operational disruption during implementation, I outlined our staged approach in terms of minimal impact to their productivity metrics. We can guarantee no more than a 0.5% fluctuation in output during the transition, less than your typical seasonal variation. What had been scheduled as a 1-hour meeting extended to 3 as their team became increasingly engaged. Their technical staff began to open up about specific challenges they'd been reluctant to share with previous vendors. By the afternoon, we were co-creating solutions at the whiteboard, their team actively contributing to the architecture. This is the first time I've understood what our IT department has been trying to explain for months, Thomas remarked as the meeting concluded. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, the tension had transformed into collaborative problem-solving. 2 weeks later, Harrington signed the largest contract in Meridian's history, $42 million over 5 years, with options to expand. The announcement sent Meridian's stock up 8% in a single day. Business journals published features on our revolutionary client approach, and suddenly my methodologies were being discussed in MBA programs. Your approach made the difference, Eleanor told me when we returned to Boston, which is why I've asked you here today. I looked around the executive committee table, suddenly aware that this wasn't a one-time invitation. We're creating a new position on the executive committee, Eleanor continued. Chief Advisory Officer. You'll be responsible for ensuring our technical capabilities align with client needs and market direction. Your team will expand to work across all departments, applying the translation methodologies you've developed. I looked at the faces around the table. James, Sandra, our CFO, our Chief Marketing Officer, all nodding in agreement. The board has already approved the position, Eleanor added. The question is whether you'll accept it. This isn't just about your technical knowledge, Sandra added. It's about how you've transformed that knowledge into a strategic asset. You've created a new competitive advantage for Meridian. Our CFO nodded. The Harrington contract alone justifies this position. But we're seeing the impact across all enterprise clients now. Retention is up 23% since your team began working with existing accounts. 5 years earlier, I had been told I was too technical. Now I was being invited to join the executive leadership specifically because of how I leveraged that technical knowledge. I accept, I said, feeling the weight and opportunity of the moment. But I have one condition. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. And that is? I want to establish a mentorship program for technical staff across the company. People with deep expertise often don't realize how valuable their knowledge can be when properly translated. I want to help them discover that value. Eleanor smiled. Consider it approved. That kind of thinking is exactly why you belong at this table. Later that week, I passed the beige conference room where Ryan had delivered that pivotal feedback. The space looked smaller now, less intimidating. Ryan had moved on to another company 2 years ago, but I still felt a strange gratitude toward him. His limitation had become my launching pad. My office now had the same panoramic view of Boston that had once intimidated me in Sandra's office. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, I reflected on the journey. I hadn't needed to become less technical. I'd needed to become more effective at making technical knowledge valuable to others. The first meeting of my mentorship program was scheduled for the following week. 20 highly technical employees from across the company had signed up, many facing the same feedback I had once received. Too technical, too in the weeds. Can't see the forest for the trees. I couldn't wait to show them how their depth of knowledge could become their greatest strength. My phone buzzed with a calendar invite. Executive Strategy Retreat, Vermont, next month. Below it was a personal note from Eleanor. Bring your technical perspective. It's why you're here. I smiled, accepting the invitation. The technical knowledge that had once been labeled a liability had become my greatest asset, not by diminishing it, but by transforming how I shared it with the world. The first item on our strategic planning agenda, read Eleanor's attached note, is how to scale the Charlotte Davis approach across the entire organization. I glanced at the framed quote I'd recently hung on my wall, words from my graduate advisor that had guided my transformation. The most valuable knowledge is the kind that can move between worlds. Sometimes the very thing we're criticized for can become our superpower when we find the right way to channel it. My manager said I was too technical. Now, I advise the executive board because of it.